My name is Celine, 32 years old, an Army staff sergeant who has faced bombs and bullets. But nothing prepared me for the cruelty of my husband's family. On exactly our second wedding anniversary, inside a lavish dining room in Virginia, my father-in-law stood up, tapped his wine glass, and declared before 40 guests, "Since you cannot provide this lineage with an heir, this is our gift to you." He threw a file onto the table. A divorce petition. My husband, Timothy, turned his face away, while my mother-in-law led out Judith, a young girl wearing the heirloom pearl earrings I was never allowed to touch, and introduced her as the new fiancée. They called me a broken machine that needed to be discarded. They forced me to sign the divorce papers right at the banquet table to humiliate me. But they didn't know that my best friend, a combat medic, was holding a test result envelope that would turn their victory into an eternal tragedy. Let me know where you are listening from, and hit subscribe if you believe that traitors do not deserve forgiveness. The air inside the Ashley estate in McLean, Virginia, was suffocating. It didn't smell like the diesel and dust of the motor pool at Fort Belvoir, or the sterile antiseptic of the barracks. It smelled of old money, expensive perfume, and silent judgment. Tonight, on the night of our anniversary, I felt less like a wife and more like an intruder. I pulled at the hem of my navy blue cocktail dress. It felt wrong on my skin. My body missed the rough, reliable comfort of my OCP camouflage uniform. Here, surrounded by women in silk gowns and men in bespoke suits, I was painfully aware of my differences. I wasn't Staff Sergeant Celine Ashley here, I was just Timothy's mistake, the foster kid who had somehow infiltrated their circle. "Happy anniversary, dear," a woman with a tightly pulled facelift said to me, her eyes scanning my waistline before flicking away. "Still no happy news?" "No, ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice disciplined and tight. "Not yet." She offered a pitying smile that didn't reach her eyes and moved on to the buffet, where mounds of black caviar rested on silver platters. I took a sip of champagne, but it tasted like vinegar. I looked for Timothy. My husband was standing near the limestone fireplace, swirling his scotch. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the perfect image of the golden boy, but he was sweating. He kept checking his Rolex, his eyes darting around the room like a soldier who knew an ambush was coming. "Timothy?" I whispered, walking up to him. I reached for his hand, needing his strength. He flinched. He actually pulled his hand away. "Not now, Celine," he muttered, looking over my shoulder at his father. "Just stay calm, please." Stay calm. The discipline instilled in me by drill sergeants kicked in. I straightened my back. "Assess the threat," I told myself. "Something is wrong." Then the sound came. Clink, clink, clink. Mason Ashley, my father-in-law, was tapping his spoon against a crystal flute. The chatter in the room died instantly. Mason was a man who didn't demand attention. He expected it as his birthright. He stood at the head of the long mahogany table, looking like a king addressing his subjects. "Friends, family," Mason began, his voice booming and rich. "We gathered tonight to celebrate 2 years of Timothy and Celine." There was a polite ripple of applause. I tried to smile, but my stomach twisted. "However," Mason continued, his tone dropping an octave, "the Ashley legacy is not built on parties. It is built on bloodlines. It is built on the future. And a family requires a foundation." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the Persian rug. Mason turned his cold gray eyes directly onto me. There was no warmth, no fatherly affection. Just the look a general gives a soldier he is about to court-martial. "We have been patient," Mason said, "but a business cannot run on deficits, and a marriage cannot run on barren ground." My breath hitched. Barren. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "Since you cannot provide this lineage with an heir," Mason said, his voice void of emotion, "we have decided to correct the error. This is our gift to you." He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it. A thick manila folder slapped onto the polished mahogany table. It slid across the surface with a dry, hissing sound, knocking over a salt shaker before coming to a rest directly in front of me. My hands shook as I reached for it. I opened the cover. The bold black letters screamed at me. Petition for dissolution of marriage reason. Irreconcilable differences. Biological incompatibility. Biological incompatibility. They had reduced my entire existence, my love, my 2 years of devotion, down to a clinical defect. Like I was a car with a bad transmission, like I was a broken machine. A collective gasp went through the room. 40 pairs of eyes bored into me, some horrified, some amused, most just glad it wasn't them. Mother? Timothy's voice cracked. I looked up. Sharon, my mother-in-law, was walking in from the kitchen. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Judith, a 24-year-old debutante from a senator's family. Judith was wearing a white silk dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown. She looked down at the floor, feigning shyness, but I saw the corner of her lip twitch upward. And then I saw them. Hanging from Judith's ears were the teardrop pearl earrings, the Ashley family heirlooms. The ones Sharon had told me were being cleaned for 2 years. The ones that were supposed to be passed to the wife of the eldest son. They were gleaming against Judith's neck. Judith is young, Sharon announced, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder like she was presenting a prize heifer at a county fair. She comes from good stock. She understands her duty. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned to Timothy. He was the only person in the room who could stop this. He was my husband. We had sworn vows. To have and to hold. Timothy, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell them this is insane. Timothy looked at me. For a split second, I saw the man I loved. The man who used to make me blueberry pancakes. The man who promised we were a team. I saw the conflict in his eyes. But then, he looked at Mason. Mason simply raised an eyebrow. Timothy's shoulders slumped. He didn't scream. He didn't flip the table. He didn't grab my hand and storm out. Instead, Timothy grabbed his wine glass. He didn't look at me. He looked down at his expensive Italian leather shoes, drained the red liquid in one long, cowardly gulp, and set the glass down. He stared at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. The silence from him was louder than any scream. It was the sound of my heart breaking. But as I watched him stare at the floor, I realized this wasn't a sudden decision. The cowardice I was seeing now, it hadn't just appeared tonight. My mind raced back, away from the humiliating glare of the chandeliers, back to the silence of our kitchen exactly 12 hours ago. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The internal alarm clock in my head went off at 05. Sharp. No snooze button, no groaning. Just eyes open, boots on the ground, figuratively speaking. That was the army training. It didn't matter that I was lying in a king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets in a sprawling house in McLean. My body still woke up ready for PT formation. I turned my head to look at the other side of the bed. It was empty. The sheets were barely wrinkled, cold to the touch. Timothy must have gotten up early, or maybe he'd tossed and turned all night. I sat up and reached for the silver-framed photo on the nightstand. It was us 2 years ago today. I was in a simple white dress, not the couture gown his mother wanted, but one I had bought myself, and he was looking at me like I was the only person in the world. I ran my thumb over the glass. Semper fidelis, I whispered to the empty room. Always faithful. Technically, it's the Marine Corps motto, not the Army's. But growing up bouncing between 6 different foster homes before I turned 18, the concept of loyalty wasn't just a slogan to me. It was a religion. It was the only thing that mattered. When I said my vows to Timothy, I didn't just see them as legal promises. I saw them as a binding contract, stronger than any military enlistment. I was going to be the wife he needed. I was going to build the family I never had. I threw off the covers and headed downstairs. The house was silent, that heavy, expensive kind of silence you only get with thick insulation and high ceilings. My mission for this morning was simple: the perfect anniversary breakfast. I entered the kitchen, a space that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread, white marble countertops, a 6-burner Wolf range, and a refrigerator that cost more than my first car. I tied my apron tight, treating it like my body armor. I got to work. I wasn't just cooking, I was crafting a memory. I pulled out the fresh blueberries, the organic flour, and the buttermilk. Timothy loved blueberry pancakes. Not the frozen kind, but the ones made from scratch, fluffy and golden brown at the edges. I placed the turkey bacon in the skillet, listening to the satisfying sizzle as the heat hit the meat. As the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon filled the air, I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. To most people, this was just breakfast. But to me, the girl who grew up eating cold cereal in crowded group homes where the milk was always expired, this smell was everything. It was the scent of stability. It was the scent of home. I had spent my entire adult life fighting to earn this specific feeling, the safety of a warm kitchen and a family to feed. I set the table at the breakfast nook. Fresh, squeezed orange juice. The good maple syrup warmed up in a small pitcher. I even folded the napkins into neat triangles, aligning the silverware with military precision. At 06:15, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, slow. Timothy walked into the kitchen. He was already dressed in his charcoal gray suit, his tie knotted perfectly tight against his throat. He looked immaculate, every inch the heir to the Ashley financial empire. "Happy anniversary, baby," I said, beaming at him. I turned off the stove and plated a stack of 3 perfect pancakes, sliding them onto the placemat in front of his usual seat. Timothy didn't look at the pancakes. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the coffee pot, poured a mug of black coffee, and sat down. Before I could even walk around the island to kiss him, he snapped open the Wall Street Journal. The newspaper went up like a wall between us, a literal paper fortress. "Tim?" I said, my voice faltering slightly. "I made the blueberry ones, with the turkey bacon you like." From behind the paper, a voice that sounded like a stranger's replied, "I'm not hungry, Celine. I have a merge meeting at 8:00. I can't be sluggish." "But it's our anniversary," I said, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "I thought we could just have 20 minutes. You know, start the day right before the party tonight." He lowered the paper just an inch. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a tightness around his jaw that I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had, and I just chose to ignore it. "The party," he muttered, as if the word tasted like ash. "Right, the party." He took a sip of coffee, winced like it burned him, and stood up abruptly. The chair legs scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. "I have to go," he said. He didn't check his watch. He just grabbed his briefcase. "You're leaving now?" I asked, stepping forward, instinctively reaching out to straighten his lapel. It was a habit, a wife's gesture. He stepped back. He actually took a distinct, tactical step backward to avoid my touch. "Don't," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a flat, cold command. "I'll see you tonight, Celine. Make sure you're ready by 6:00. Mother wants photos before the guests arrive." "Timothy, wait." The door to the garage slammed shut. The sound echoed through the big, empty house, vibrating in my chest. I stood there in the middle of my perfect kitchen. The steam was still rising from the pancakes. The bacon was still crisp. But the warmth was gone. I sank onto a bar stool and stared at his empty plate. I picked up a fork and poked at the fluffy stack I had spent an hour preparing. "He's just stressed," my brain tried to reason. "It's the merger. It's his father riding him about the quarterly earnings. Men like Timothy carry the weight of the world. Sometimes they snap. It's not about you. It's not about us." I tried to force the logic to work. I tried to apply the benefit of the doubt, a strategy my therapist suggested for marriage. But then, the soldier in me spoke up. The staff sergeant who had been trained to spot IEDs on the side of a dirt road in Kandahar took over. "No," the inner voice whispered. "This isn't stress. This is avoidance. This is a change in the pattern of life. You don't refuse a meal from someone you love unless you can't stomach the guilt of looking at them. You don't build a wall out of a newspaper unless you're hiding something behind it." I looked at the closed door where my husband had just exited without a single word of affection on the most important day of our year. My heart wanted to cry, but my gut was tightening into a knot of suspicion. This coldness. It hadn't started this morning. I had been lying to myself. My eyes drifted to the kitchen counter, where a pile of mail from weeks ago was still sorted in a basket. My mind flashed back to exactly 3 weeks ago. That was the first red flag. That was the first piece of intel I should have analyzed instead of ignoring. It was a simple phone bill, just a few sheets of paper. But looking back now, in the silence of this rejected breakfast, I realized that was where the war had actually begun. 3 weeks ago. That was when the perimeter was first breached. It didn't start with a bang or an explosion. It started with a piece of paper that looked innocent enough. A standard Verizon wireless bill lying on the white marble kitchen island. Usually, Timothy handled all the finances online, bearing the details in encrypted spreadsheets and password-protected accounts I never saw. But this time, a paper statement had slipped through the digital cracks, mailed directly to the Ashley household. I didn't open it intending to spy. I opened it to file it, just trying to be a helpful wife. But as I smoothed out the paper, my eyes caught a pattern. In the Army, you are trained to look for anomalies. Anything that breaks the baseline is a potential threat. A pile of rocks on the side of a road that wasn't there yesterday. A sudden silence in a village that is usually noisy. You survive by noticing what doesn't fit. On page 3 of the bill, there was a glaring anomaly. A number ending in 8821. It appeared 12 times in the last billing cycle. But it wasn't the frequency that triggered my internal alarm. It was the timing. 02.14 a.m., 18 minutes, 01:45 a.m., 32 minutes, 03:00 a.m., 12 minutes. These weren't business calls. No merger negotiation happens at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, not even in the high-stakes world of Virginia finance. This was intimacy. This was a secret. I sat there at the island, a red pen in my hand, circling the timestamps. My heart wasn't racing. It had slowed down to a cold, heavy thud. This was intel. I was building a case. When Timothy came home that evening, loosening his silk tie as he walked through the door, I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. I simply laid the paper on the counter, the red circles looking like bullet holes against the white page. "Tim," I said, my voice steady, masking the tremor in my hands. "Who is 8821? He stopped mid-stride. He looked at the paper, then at me. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes, the primal fear of being caught. But just as quickly, it was replaced by something else. Annoyance. He laughed. A short, dismissive scoff that made me feel small. "Are you serious, Celine?" "I'm asking a direct question," I said. "Why are you on the phone for 30 minutes at 2 a.m. when you're supposed to be asleep beside me?" Timothy walked over, picked up the bill, and tossed it into the recycling bin like it was junk mail. Then he turned on me, his face twisting into a mask of victimhood. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, shaking his head. "You bring the war home with you, Celine. You treat this marriage like a surveillance operation." "I found a number, Tim. That's not surveillance. That's a phone bill." "It's a client in Hong Kong," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Time zones, Celine. Do you understand how international finance works? Or are you too busy looking for enemies in your own kitchen?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You're paranoid. You know that, right? Ever since you got back from that last deployment, you're always on edge. You analyze everything. You verify everything. It's exhausting." I blinked, taking a step back. I'm not paranoid." "Yes, you are," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, sounding almost sad, almost concerned. "It's the PTSD, isn't it? You can't turn it off. You're suffocating me, Celine. Your rigidity. It's killing any joy in this house. Suffocating. Rigid. PTSD. He was using my service, my trauma, and my training as a weapon against me. He was twisting reality until I felt the ground shake beneath my feet. I looked at the recycling bin. Was it a client? Was I crazy? Maybe I was too on edge. Maybe I was damaging this marriage with my suspicions. That is what they call gaslighting. It's not just lying. It's making you question your own sanity so you stop fighting back. And for a moment, it worked. A few days later, the doubt was still eating at me when I went to the commissary on Fort Belvoir for the weekly grocery run. The commissary is usually my safe space. It's orderly. It's full of people who understand the life, the deployments, the uniforms, the sacrifice. But that day, in the cereal aisle, my two worlds collided in the worst way possible. Celine, hi. I turned to see a young woman waving at me. Judith. I knew her vaguely. Her father was a senator who played golf with Mason Ashley. She was young, 24 maybe, with bouncy blonde hair and a smile that looked like it had never known a day of hardship. Hello, Judith, I said, gripping the handle of my cart tighter. What are you doing on base? Oh, just picking up some things for the charity drive, she chirped. She looked at my cart, protein bars, vegetables, cleaning supplies. Then she looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. Timothy talks about you all the time, she said. My grip tightened on the plastic handle. Does he? Yeah, she giggled. He says you're so disciplined. So strong. He says living with you is like living with a drill sergeant sometimes. She covered her mouth playfully. I told him he should appreciate a woman who keeps things in order. But you know Tim. He likes things a bit softer. Softer. It was a casual comment, innocent on the surface. But it was a precision strike. She knew things she shouldn't know. She knew the dynamic of my marriage. She knew his complaints. Well, I said, my voice dry. Discipline keeps people alive, Judith. Oh, totally, she agreed, oblivious, or perhaps perfectly aware. Anyway, see you at the anniversary party. She bounced away, leaving me standing next to the Cheerios, feeling like I had just been stabbed with a dull knife. I walked out to the parking lot, the Virginia humidity hitting me like a wet blanket. I loaded my bags into the trunk of my Ford Explorer. Around me, I saw other military families. A captain in uniform hugging his wife. A young specialist loading a car seat while his partner laughed. They looked tired, yes, but they looked united. They looked happy. I stood there, leaning against my car, and I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I felt like a total failure. A failure as a wife, a failure as a woman. I know there are people listening right now who have felt this exact same pain. That moment when someone looks you in the eye and tells you that your reality is wrong, that you are the crazy one. It is the loneliest feeling in the world. If you have ever been made to doubt your own sanity by someone you loved, please hit that like button and comment, I believe you, below. Let's show everyone that we are not crazy and we are not alone. I took a deep breath, staring at my reflection in the car window. I remembered the speech by Admiral McRaven that we had watched in training. He talked about the rigorous Navy SEAL training and the brass bell that hangs in the center of the compound. All you have to do to quit is ring the bell. Ring the bell, and you don't have to do the obstacle course. Ring the bell, and the pain stops. If you want to change the world, he said, don't ever, ever ring the bell. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired. I looked rigid. I looked like the broken machine Timothy accused me of being. But I was a soldier. I didn't quit. Don't ring the bell, Celine, I told myself. Fix this. Prove him wrong. Be the wife he wants. Be softer. I didn't know then that the enemy wasn't my PTSD. The enemy wasn't my paranoia. The enemy was waiting for me at Sunday dinner, and no amount of softness was going to save me. But in that parking lot, I decided to fight for my marriage one last time. And that decision led me straight into the lion's den at Mason and Sharon's estate. Sunday dinner at the Ashley estate was not a meal. It was a performance review. And tonight, I was the employee on the chopping block. The dining room was dimly lit by a massive crystal chandelier that cast long, fractured shadows across the table. We were eating filet mignon, imported from some exclusive ranch in Wyoming. Mason liked his steak rare, bloody rare. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, watching my father-in-law pick up his serrated steak knife. He didn't just cut the meat, he sawed through it with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Scrape, slice, scrape. Red juice oozed out of the steak and pooled on the white porcelain china. "I was down in Kentucky last week," Mason said, breaking the heavy silence. He didn't look up. He was focused entirely on dissecting his food. Checking on the new investments at the stables, beautiful creatures, thoroughbreds, but it's a brutal business. He skewered a piece of meat and pointed it at Timothy. "You know the rule of thumb, son. You don't bet on a horse with bad hips, and you certainly don't breed a mare that refuses to take." Timothy nodded, taking a sip of his Cabernet. "Of course, father. It's bad ROI. ROI. Exactly," Mason grunted. He chewed slowly. "Return on investment. It applies to portfolios, it applies to livestock, and it applies to families." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I gripped my napkin tighter. I knew exactly where this was going. "Speaking of families," Sharon chimed in. She was sitting to my right, wearing a cashmere cardigan and a string of pearls. She smiled at me, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was just a baring of teeth. "Celine, dear, you're barely touching your food. You need your strength." "I'm not very hungry, Sharon," I said quietly. "That's the problem, isn't it?" She sighed, swirling her wine glass. "You're always so tense." I was reading an article the other day in Town and Country about stress and fertility. It said that women who work in masculine environments, like the army, often struggle to conceive. I felt my spine stiffen. "My service has nothing to do with this, doesn't it?" Sharon tilted her head. "Think about it, dear. All that testosterone you're around all day. The combat boots, the heavy packs, the shouting. You've hardened yourself, Celine. You've turned your body into a weapon, not a vessel." She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was cold. "You're a dry field, honey. Nothing can grow in a dry field. You lack the softness required to be a mother." A dry field. The insult was so visceral, so cutting, it took my breath away. She wasn't just attacking my body, she was attacking my soul. She was stripping away my womanhood because I wore a uniform. I looked across the table at Timothy. This was the moment. This was where he was supposed to slam his fist on the table. This was where he was supposed to say, "Don't speak to my wife that way. She serves her country. She is strong, and I love her." "Tim," I whispered. Timothy looked up from his plate. He looked at his mother, then at his father, and finally at me. His eyes were blank, empty. He cut another piece of his rare steak, put it in his mouth, and chewed. He said nothing. The silence of his chewing was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of betrayal. It was the sound of a marriage dying. "It's nothing personal, Celine," Mason said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "It's just biology. And economics. The Ashley name needs to carry on. We can't let sentimental attachments to a damaged vessel get in the way of the future." Sharon nodded in agreement. "It's like the good book says, dear. Matthew 7:19. She took a delicate sip of wine. "Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." She quoted scripture like a curse. She used God to justify her cruelty. I felt bile rise in my throat. I couldn't breathe. The smell of the bloody meat, the clinking of the silverware, the smug look on Sharon's face, it was all suffocating me. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. "I need to use the restroom." "Don't be long," Mason called after me, not even turning his head. "We're discussing the trust fund next." I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the marble hallway. I kept my head high until I was out of sight, relying on every ounce of military bearing I had left. But the moment I locked the door of the guest bathroom, I crumbled. I leaned over the sink, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, my skin pale. A dry field, a damaged vessel, a tree to be cut down. Was it true? Was I broken? Had the army taken so much from me that I had nothing left to give a child? I reached for a towel to dry my face when I heard voices. The acoustics in this old house were strange. The heating vents carried sound from the dining room right into the bathroom. She looked ready to cry. Sharon's voice drifted through the vent. Honestly, Tim, it's pathetic. She's so emotionally unstable. It's handled, Mother, Timothy's voice said. He sounded annoyed, not defending me, but annoyed that he had to deal with the drama. I told you, the papers are drawn up. I just need to get her to sign. Good, Mason grunted. Because the senator called me yesterday. Judith is ready. She's young, she's healthy, and she's not damaged goods. We treat this like a personnel change at the firm. Cut the losses, bring in new talent. Personnel change. I stood frozen in the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. They weren't talking about a divorce. They were talking about firing me. They were talking about replacing a defective part in their machine. I looked at my reflection again. The tears stopped. The sadness in my eyes hardened into something else. Something cold. Something dangerous. They were so sure I was broken. They were so sure the problem was me. But what if it isn't? The question hit me like a lightning bolt. We had been trying for 2 years. I'd been the one taking the vitamins. I'd been the one tracking my cycles. Timothy had refused to get tested, claiming his virility was unquestionable because he was an Ashley. But looking at that man tonight, a man who couldn't even look his wife in the eye, a man who let his parents butcher her character while he ate steak, I realized something. Cowardice isn't just a character flaw, sometimes it's genetic. I wiped the last drop of water from my chin. I wasn't going to cry anymore. And I certainly wasn't going to let them classify me as damaged goods without a fight. I needed proof. I needed science. Tomorrow I wouldn't go to the base chaplain. I wouldn't go to a marriage counselor. I was going to the clinic, and I was going to find out exactly whose field was actually dry. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back out into the lion's den. But this time, I wasn't prey. I was a soldier gathering intelligence, and the war had just begun. The waiting room of the fertility clinic in Tyson's Corner smelled of lavender hand sanitizer and expensive hope. It was a sleek, modern space with beige armchairs, abstract art on the walls, and a hushed atmosphere that felt more like a spa than a medical facility. But to me, it felt like a holding cell. I sat in the corner, clutching my purse like it contained state secrets. My phone buzzed in my lap. I looked down, praying to see Timothy's name followed by, "I'm parking the car," or "Be there in 5. Instead, the text message read, "Merger meeting ran over. Board is frantic. Can't get away. You've got this. Let me know what they say." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. A merger meeting. At 4 p.m. on a Friday? It was a lie. A sloppy, cowardly lie. He wasn't in a boardroom. He was likely at a jeweler's, or worse, with her. He's not coming, is he? The voice beside me was rough, low, and comforting. Erica sat next to me, looking completely out of place in her cargo pants and tactical boots among the women in yoga pants and designer flats. Erica was a former combat medic who had patched up shrapnel wounds in the back of a Humvee while under fire. She was the only person in the world I trusted with my 6. "He has a meeting," I lied, my voice weak. Erica scoffed, crossing her arms. "He's AWOL Celine. That's what he is. If he were in my squad, I'd have him scrubbing latrines for a month." I tried to smile, but it hurt. I looked around the room. There were 3 other couples waiting. Every single woman had a hand to hold. One husband was rubbing his wife's back, whispering something that made her giggle. Another was reading a copy of Parents magazine, pointing out cribs to his partner. I felt a wave of shame so hot it burned my neck. I was the only one here alone. Well, not alone. I had Erica. But Erica couldn't give me a child. Erica couldn't fix the fact that my marriage felt like a sinking ship. "I feel like I'm defective," I whispered, confessing the fear that had been keeping me awake for nights. "Look at them, Erica. They're normal. I'm just damaged goods. Maybe Sharon is right. Maybe I'm too hard. Maybe I broke myself." Erica's hand shot out and gripped mine. Her grip was iron strong. "Stop that," she commanded, her voice dropping to that intense whisper she used when things got real. "Listen to me, Sergeant. Your body survived basic training. It survived deployment. It carried 80 pounds of gear up mountains. Your body is steel, Celine, not glass. You are not broken because you served. Don't let those soft-handed civilians gaslight you into hating your own strength. Celine Ashley? A nurse in peach-colored scrubs called out from the doorway. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. Erica stood up with me. Family only beyond this point, the nurse said automatically, looking at Erica's boots with mild disdain. I'm her emergency contact, Erica stated, stepping forward with a look that dared the nurse to argue. And unless you want to explain to Jag why you denied a soldier her support person, I'm coming in. The nurse blinked, swallowed, and nodded. Right this way. The exam room was freezing. It always is. I stripped off my clothes and put on the paper gown that opened in the back, the universal uniform of vulnerability. I sat on the edge of the table, the crinkling paper sounding like thunder in the small room. Dr. Evans was kind, efficient, and professional. But as she conducted the ultrasound, the silence stretched thin. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the dots, trying to dissociate. I tried to go to my happy place, but all I could see was Mason cutting that bloody steak. Physically, Dr. Evans said, snapping off her latex gloves and turning to her computer. Everything looks structurally sound, Celine. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. So, I'm not barren. No, she said, swiveling her chair to face me. But I'm looking at your blood work from the prelims. Your cortisol levels are through the roof. Adrenaline, too. It's like your body is in a constant state of fight or flight. She looked at me over her glasses. Stress is a powerful contraceptive, Celine. If your body thinks you are in a war zone, it won't prioritize reproduction. It prioritizes survival. Is there significant stress at home? I looked at Erica. Then I looked at my hands. Is there stress? My home wasn't a home. It was a minefield. Every dinner was an ambush. Every conversation was an interrogation. My body wasn't rejecting a baby. My body was rejecting the environment. It was trying to protect a potential child from being born into a war zone. Work is demanding, I said, dodging the truth. Well, Dr. Evans said, printing out a label. We did the full panel today. The comprehensive results will be ready tomorrow afternoon. I can have them couriered to you, or I need them tomorrow, I said, cutting her off. It's urgent. I'll put a rush on it, she promised. When I got back to the house in McLean, it was dark. The porch lights were on, casting long shadows against the brick columns. I walked inside, exhausted, feeling raw and exposed. Timothy was in the living room, watching CNBC with the volume on mute. He didn't get up to ask how it went. He didn't ask if I was okay. He kept his eyes on the scrolling stock ticker. I put my things in the guest suite, he said, his voice flat. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. What? I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, he said, finally looking at me. His face was a mask of cold indifference. I need space, Celine. I need to think about the future. About whether this is working. He was leaving me. Not legally, not yet. But he was abandoning the marital bed the night before our anniversary. He was making space for Judith, even if she wasn't physically here yet. Fine, I said. I didn't have the energy to fight. Sleep wherever you want, Timothy. I walked up the grand staircase alone. I entered our master bedroom, which suddenly felt like a cavern. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, trying to wash off the feeling of the clinic, the feeling of Sharon's insults, the feeling of Timothy's apathy. I lay in the center of the king-sized bed, the sheets cold on the empty side. I placed my hand on my flat stomach. You're not a dry field, I whispered to myself, repeating Erica's words. You are steel. I closed my eyes, but I didn't pray to save my marriage. That prayer had died in the waiting room today. Instead, I prayed for the truth. I didn't know it then, but the courier Dr. Evans promised wouldn't be a mailman. It would be Erica. And the envelope coming tomorrow wouldn't just contain medical data. It contained the ammunition that would blow the Ashley family legacy to pieces. All I had to do was survive until the party. The time for flashbacks, for memories of cold clinics and lonely breakfasts, was over. I was back in the present moment, sitting at the head of the mahogany table under the blinding crystal chandelier. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. 40 guests sat frozen, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths, their eyes darting between me and the manila folder that Mason had just slid across the table. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Reason: biological incompatibility. The words seemed to vibrate on the page. My hands were trembling, not from fear anymore, but from a rage that was boiling deep in my gut. I looked at Timothy. My husband, the man who had sworn to love me in sickness and in health, was staring intently at the stem of his wineglass, refusing to meet my gaze. "We didn't want to make a scene, Celine," Mason said, his voice smooth and devoid of any real apology. "But we are practical people, and practical problems require practical solutions." "A solution?" I repeated, my voice raspy. "I am your wife, Timothy, not a problem to be solved." Timothy opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, Sharon clapped her hands together. Clap, clap. It was the sharp, commanding sound one uses to call a servant, or a well-trained dog. "Come on out, darling," Sharon cooed, looking toward the arched doorway that led to the kitchen. "Don't be shy. They need to see the future." The double doors swung open, and out of the shadows stepped Judith. If the divorce papers were a slap in the face, Judith's appearance was a knife to the heart. She wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. She was wearing a slip dress made of white silk that hugged every curve of her body. It was elegant, expensive, and completely inappropriate for someone else's anniversary party. It looked like a wedding dress. It was a statement. She was the bride in waiting, and I was the corpse being cleared from the altar. Judith walked into the room with a practiced modesty, keeping her head lowered slightly, but I saw the triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She glided over to stand behind Timothy's chair, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. Timothy didn't flinch. He leaned back into her touch. But it wasn't the dress that made the breath catch in my throat. It wasn't even the way she touched my husband. It was the earrings. Dangling from Judith's lobes were two perfect, teardrop pearls set in platinum. The Ashley family heirlooms. I felt a physical blow to my chest. 2 years ago, on the morning of my wedding, I'd asked Sharon if I could wear those pearls. I wanted to feel like I belonged. I wanted to be part of the tradition. Sharon had looked at me with a cold smile and said, "Oh, honey, those are for family. They are far too delicate. I'm afraid you might break them." Break them. Because I was the rough foster kid, the soldier, the outsider. And now, there they were, shimmering against Judith's neck. They hadn't been too delicate. I had just been too unworthy. "Isn't she lovely?" Sharon announced to the room, gesturing to Judith like she was presenting a prize-winning heifer at a state fair. Judith comes from good stock. Her father is Senator Miller, as you all know. She is young, she is vibrant, and most importantly, Sharon paused, her eyes locking onto mine with malicious glee. She is fertile, she's ready to do what needs to be done. Unlike some people who are merely taking up space. The room was silent. The cruelty was so naked, so undeniable, that even the wealthy guests seemed uncomfortable. Someone coughed nervously. "Mother, please," Timothy murmured, but he didn't move Judith's hand from his shoulder. He reached into his tuxedo jacket pocket and pulled out a pen. It was his Mont Blanc, the heavy black resin one I'd bought him for his promotion last year. He uncapped it and slid it across the table, right on top of the divorce papers. "Just sign it, Celine," Timothy said, his voice sounding exhausted. "Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at him. "You're replacing me? Before the ink is even dry? You're parading her in front of me wearing your grandmother's jewelry?" "We all have roles to play," Timothy said, finally looking me in the eye. His eyes were dead. There was no love left, only self-preservation. "You couldn't play yours. Judith can. It's just logic." He leaned forward, lowering his voice so only I and the people closest to us could hear. "Sign the papers, Celine. Take the settlement money. Walk away. Keep a little bit of dignity." Dignity. The word hung in the air. He was talking about dignity while his mistress stood behind him wearing white, and his parents auctioned off his marriage like a business merger. I looked around the room. I saw the pity in their eyes. Poor Celine, the barren wife, the rejected soldier. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg. Or maybe they expected me to flip the table and scream, proving that I was the crazy one Timothy had warned them about. I know so many of you listening right now have been in a position where you were asked to swallow your pride and accept disrespect just to keep the peace. It is a terrible choice to make. If you were sitting in that chair, would you sign the papers and walk away, or would you fight? Hit that like button if you think Celine should burn it all down, and comment, sign it below if you think she needs to get away from these toxic people immediately. I looked at Judith. She offered me a small, sympathetic smile, the kind of smile a winner gives a loser. She touched the pearl earring, making sure I saw it. Something inside me snapped, not in a loud way, but in a quiet, permanent way. The hope I had held onto, the hope that Timothy would wake up, the hope that I could fix this, evaporated. I wasn't losing a husband, I was losing a tumor. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen. It felt heavy and cold in my hand. "You're right, Timothy," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "I should keep my dignity." I didn't read the terms. I didn't ask about the money. I flipped to the signature page. "I'm not signing this because I agree with you," I said, staring Mason in the eye. "I'm signing this because I refuse to stay at a table where respect is not served." I pressed the nib to the paper. The scratching sound was the only noise in the room. Celine. Ashley. I signed it with a flourish, a sharp, angular signature that looked like barbed wire. I capped the pen. I didn't hand it back to Timothy. I dropped it onto the table. It hit the wood with a loud clack that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Done," I said, standing up. "She's your problem now." Timothy let out a long breath, looking relieved. Mason smiled, reaching for his wineglass to toast his victory. Sharon beamed at Judith, thinking they had won, thinking the broken machine had been successfully decommissioned and removed. But they were celebrating too early. Because just as I turned to leave, the heavy oak doors at the entrance of the dining hall slammed open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. And standing there, silhouetted against the hall light, wasn't a waiter. It was Erica. She was wearing her dress blues, her medals shining on her chest, and in her hand she held a thick, sealed envelope that looked like a weapon. The ink on my divorce papers was still wet. But the war wasn't over. It was just about to get explosive. The sound of the heavy oak doors slamming against the walls echoed like a mortar round impact. The polite, hushed murmurs of the Virginia elite were instantly silenced. Standing in the archway wasn't a waiter with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. It wasn't security. It was Erica. But this wasn't the Erica I saw yesterday in cargo pants and a t-shirt. She was wearing her full Army service uniform, the dress blues. Her jacket was pressed to a razor's edge, the gold stripe on her trousers caught the light, and on her chest sat a rack of ribbons and medals that told a story of combat, sacrifice, and survival. She didn't look like a party guest. She looked like an avenging angel sent by the Department of Defense. The room froze. There is something about a uniform that commands respect, even from people who think they own the world. Erica didn't wait to be invited in. She marched. Her tactical boots had been swapped for high-gloss dress shoes, and the rhythmic click-clack on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. She walked right past me. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on a target downrange. "Who the hell let you in?" Mason demanded, half rising from his chair. His face was flushed with the arrogance of a man whose property lines had been crossed. Erica didn't stop until she was standing at the foot of the table, directly opposite Mason. She didn't salute. He wasn't her commanding officer. He was a hostile combatant. "I'm not here for the party, Mr. Ashley," Erica said, her voice projecting with that specific clarity only NCOs possess. "I'm here to deliver an after-action report, because your intelligence is faulty." "Get out," Sharon hissed, clutching her pearls. "This is a private family matter." "No, ma'am," Erica corrected her, her tone icy. This is a tactical error, and it's about to become a catastrophe. She reached into the inner pocket of her dress jacket. Timothy flinched as if he thought she was pulling a weapon. In a way, she was. She pulled out a thick, white envelope. It bore the red stamp of the Tyson's Corner Fertility Clinic. Urgent. Confidential. "Celine just signed your papers," Erica said, her eyes sweeping over Timothy and Judith. "She signed them because you told her she was broken. You told her she was a biological dead end. You told her she couldn't give you the one thing you care about more than your own souls. A legacy." Erica looked at the envelope in her hand, then back at Mason. "You really should have checked the manifest before you jettisoned the cargo, Mason." She didn't hand the envelope to him. She threw it. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she sent the packet spinning across the long mahogany table. It hissed as it slid over the polished wood, knocking over a crystal salt shaker before slamming into Mason's chest with a dull thwack. It landed right on his dinner plate, resting next to his half-eaten rare steak. "Read it," Erica commanded. Mason hesitated. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. He looked at the envelope, then at Timothy. Timothy looked confused, his mouth slightly open, a piece of bread halfway to his lips. "Read it," Erica barked, the command cracking like a whip. Mason snatched up the envelope. He tore the seal with trembling fingers. He pulled out the trifold medical report. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't opened the results. I had come straight here. I looked at Erica, but her face was a stone mask. I watched Mason's face. At first, it was red with indignation. But as his eyes scanned the lines of data, the hormone levels, the bolded text at the bottom of the page, the color didn't just fade, it vanished. He went pale, ashen. He looked like a man who had just watched his stock portfolio hit zero. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes widened, staring at the paper as if it were a death warrant. "What is it?" Sharon asked, leaning in, her voice shrill. "Mason!" Mason's hand started to shake, the hand holding his glass of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon. Tremble. Shake. Then, gravity took over. Crash! The crystal goblet slipped from his fingers, hit the edge of the table, and shattered. Dark red wine exploded outward. It splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. It dripped down onto the beige Persian rug, spreading like a pool of blood from a fresh wound. Nobody moved to clean it up. The stain grew larger, soaking into the fibers, ruining something irreplaceable. Just like they had ruined my marriage. Erica smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a sniper who had just confirmed a kill shot from a mile away. "You don't understand the medical jargon, do you?" Erica asked, stepping closer. "Let me translate the intel for the civilians." She turned to face the room, addressing the 40 guests who were watching with bated breath. "Beta HCG levels, 45,000, Erica announced, her voice ringing clear as a bell. "Ultrasound confirmation completed at 1600 hours yesterday. Gestational sac visible, heartbeat detected, strong and rhythmic." She paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Heartbeat. Erica looked directly at Judith, who was still wearing the stolen pearls. Judith's smirk faltered. "He's 6 weeks along," Erica said. "He," Timothy whispered, finally standing up. His face was a mask of shock. "Yes, Timothy, he," Erica confirmed, locking eyes with him. "Based on the genetic screening markers, you are too busy to attend. It's a boy." A collective gasp swept through the room. Erica turned back to Mason, who was staring at the wine stain on his rug, the medical report crumpled in his fist. "Congratulations, Mr. Ashley," Erica said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You wanted an heir? You got one. A grandson. A firstborn son to carry on your precious name." She pointed a gloved finger at the divorce papers sitting on the table, right next to the pen I had just put down. "But here is the collateral damage. You just forced the mother of your only grandson to sign away her rights to this family. You called her a dry field. Well, that field is blooming, Mason. And you." Erica leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that screamed louder than a shout. You just salted the earth. I looked at Timothy. The realization was hitting him like a physical blow. The biological incompatibility wasn't real. The broken machine was working perfectly. He had just traded his wife and his son for a girl in a slip dress who was only there for the pearls. Oh my God, Sharon whispered, covering her mouth. Pack it up, Celine, Erica said, turning to me, her demeanor softening instantly from warrior to protector. We're leaving. The air in here is toxic for the baby. The silence in the room was broken, and so was the Ashley legacy. Not because of me, but because of their own greed. The ambush was successful. The enemy was in disarray. And I was going to be a mother. The silence that followed Erica's announcement didn't last long. It was broken by the sound of a reality crashing down, not just for Mason, but for everyone in the room. For 2 years, I had been the problem. I was the liability in the Ashley portfolio. But in the span of 30 seconds, the power dynamic in the room flipped so violently, it was almost dizzying. I wasn't the rejected wife anymore. I was the carrier of the only asset that mattered, the heir. And watching the Ashley family realize this was both the most satisfying and the most disgusting spectacle of my life. Timothy was the first to break formation. The shock on his face melted away, replaced instantly by a look of desperate, greedy calculation. He scrambled up from his chair, his eyes locked on my stomach as if he could see the future stock prices written there. Tim? Judith whispered, her voice trembling. She tugged at the sleeve of his tuxedo, trying to reclaim her territory. Tim, honey, what is she talking about? Who cares? We have us. Timothy looked at her, but he didn't see a fiancé. He didn't see the daughter of a senator. He saw an obstacle. He saw a bad investment. Get off me, Timothy snapped. He didn't just pull away. He shoved her. It was a hard, frantic push, the kind a man uses to clear debris from his path. Judith wasn't expecting it. She stumbled back in her towering stilettos, her arms flailing. She crashed hip first into the edge of the mahogany table before collapsing onto the Persian rug, right next to the growing stain of red wine. She looked up at him, humiliated, her eyes wide with shock. The perfect replacement had just been discarded the moment a better option appeared. Timothy didn't even look down at her. He was already rushing toward me, stepping over the spilled wine like it was holy water he was eager to cross. Celine, he gasped, reaching out with both hands. His face was flushed, his eyes wet with sudden, manufactured emotion. Oh my God, Celine, is it true? A boy? A son? He stopped just inches from me, his hands hovering as if he wanted to embrace me, but was afraid Erica might snap his wrists. It's a miracle, Timothy breathed, looking up at the ceiling as if he hadn't just been staring at the floor in shame 5 minutes ago. Don't you see, baby? This is a sign. God has blessed us. He wanted to test our faith, and we stumbled, but he has brought us back together. I watched him, fascinated by the audacity. He was rewriting history in real time. He was taking his cowardice and painting it as a test of faith. A test? I repeated, my voice flat. Yes. Sharon joined in, rushing around the table. Her face, which had been twisted in a sneer moments ago, was now softened into a grotesque mask of grandmotherly affection. She ignored Judith, who was sobbing quietly on the floor. Oh, Celine, darling, Sharon cooed, clasping her hands together. Please, you have to understand. We were just so worried. The pressure, the hormones. I was speaking out of turn. You know how I get when I'm stressed. I didn't mean any of those horrible things. She reached out to touch my arm. We are family, Celine. Blood is thicker than water. And that baby is an Ashley. He belongs here, with his grandmother. The air in the room felt thick with their desperation. They were scrambling, backpedaling, trying to unring the bell they had rung so loudly. I felt a wave of nausea. Not morning sickness, just pure revulsion. Don't touch me, I said. I didn't scream it. I didn't have to. The venom in my voice was enough to make Sharon freeze mid-step. I looked at Timothy, who was still wearing that hopeful, pathetic expression. I raised my hand and pointed a shaking finger at Judith, who was trying to pull herself up using the tablecloth. "You pushed her," I said to Timothy. "5 minutes ago, you were begging me to sign divorce papers so you could marry her. You put your grandmother's pearls on her ears, and the second you found out I had something you wanted, you threw her on the floor." Timothy blinked, sweating. "Celine, that was a mistake. Judith means nothing. She was just pressure from Dad. You know I love you. We can fix this. We can tear up the papers." He reached for the divorce petition on the table. "Don't you dare," I commanded. I stepped forward, forcing Timothy to step back. I felt Erica right beside me, a silent wall of support. "You called me a broken machine," I said, my voice rising, carrying to every corner of the room so all 40 guests could hear. "You said I was biologically incompatible. You said I was a dry field that needed to be cut down and thrown into the fire." I looked at Mason, who was still sitting in his chair, pale and trembling, holding his chest. "Well, Mr. Ashley," I said, locking eyes with the patriarch, "the machine isn't broken. The production line is working perfectly. But here is the problem with your business model." I picked up the divorce papers. The ink of my signature was dry now. Celine Ashley. Sharp and permanent. "You already signed the return policy," I said, dropping the papers back onto the table. "The contract is terminated. The machine works, but the product doesn't belong to you." "Celine, be reasonable," Timothy pleaded, tears actually streaming down his face now. Tears of a man losing his inheritance, not his wife. "That is my son. You can't just take him away." "I'm not taking him away, Timothy," I said, looking at him with zero love, zero hate, just absolute indifference. "You gave him away. You threw us out. You handed me a pen and told me to keep my dignity." I looked at the Mont Blanc pen lying on the table. "And that is exactly what I'm doing." I turned to Erica. "Let's go." "No, wait, you can't leave," Sharon shrieked, her mask falling off completely, revealing the panic underneath. "Security, stop them." But the security guard by the door, a retired Marine who had been watching the whole thing, didn't move a muscle. He looked at Erica's uniform, then at me, and gave a barely perceptible nod. He opened the door for us. As we walked toward the exit, I heard the chaos erupt behind us. Judith was screaming at Timothy. Mason was shouting at Sharon. The sound of the Ashley dynasty imploding was loud and ugly. But as I stepped out into the cool night air of Virginia, I didn't hear the noise anymore. All I heard was the rhythmic clicking of Erica's heels beside me and the steady beat of my own heart, syncing with the tiny new life inside me. I was walking away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a baby in my belly. And I had never felt richer in my life. We were halfway to the massive double front doors when Mason Ashley made his last stand. He moved with surprising speed for a man of 65 who had just consumed half a bottle of Cabernet and suffered a massive ego contusion. He planted himself squarely in front of the exit, spreading his arms wide like a gatekeeper guarding a fortress. His face was a mottled map of purple rage and white panic. "You are not walking out that door," Mason bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. "You do not get to dictate terms to me in my own house." Erica stepped forward, her hand instinctively twitching toward her belt line, but I put a hand on her arm. This wasn't a physical fight. This was a battle of wills, and I was done letting him have the high ground. "Move, Mason," I said, my voice dangerously low. "That child bears the Ashley name," Mason shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my stomach. "That is my grandson. That is the heir to this estate, to the firm, to everything I have built. He belongs to this house." "He belongs to me," I corrected him, stepping into his personal space. "I will sue you for custody." Mason spat, spit flying from his lips. "I will bury you in legal fees, Celine. I will hire the most expensive sharks in DC. I will paint you as unstable, unfit, and destitute. You won't stand a chance against my lawyers." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that seemed to startle him more than a scream would have. "Your lawyers?" I shook my head, looking at him with genuine pity. Mason, you really don't understand what you just did, do you? I reached over to the hall table where I had tossed the manila folder, the divorce papers. I picked them up and held them in front of his face like a shield. You want to go to court? Please, let's do that, I said, my voice steady and sharp. Because my JAG officer is going to have a field day with this. JAG? Mason scoffed. Military lawyers. Please. This document, I said, shaking the papers, is a signed confession. It is a legal declaration that you, Timothy, and Sharon initiated the termination of this marriage based on, and I quote, biological incompatibility and failure to produce an heir. You put it in writing, Mason. You declared under penalty of perjury that you wanted nothing to do with me because you thought I couldn't give you a baby. I took a step closer, forcing him to shrink back against the doorframe. You didn't just divorce me, I continued, emphasizing every word. You preemptively abandoned your grandchild. You went on record stating that a child was the only condition for my acceptance in this family, and when you thought there wasn't one, you threw me out. No family court judge in Virginia is going to give you custody of a child you tried to evict before he was even born. Mason's jaw worked, but no words came out. He looked at the papers in my hand, realizing that his own arrogance had forged the lock that would keep him out of his grandson's life. In the Army, we call that a self-inflicted wound, I said. You pulled the trigger, Mason. You just forgot to check where the barrel was pointing. Celine, please. Sharon's voice came from the hallway. She was leaning against the wall, looking old and frail. We can tear up the papers. We can pretend tonight never happened. Pretend? I spun around to face her. That's all you people do. You pretend to be good Christians. You pretend to be a loving family. You pretend to have honor. But I'm done with the simulation. I looked past her to where Timothy and Judith were standing. Judith was holding an ice pack to her hip, her mascara running down her face. Timothy looked like a ghost, stripped of his confidence, stripped of his mother's protection. And you two, I said, addressing the unhappy couple. You deserve each other. I looked at Judith. He shoved you, honey. He shoved you the second a better option came along. Remember that when you're walking down the aisle. If you think he won't do the same to you the moment your father loses an election or your looks fade, you're not just mean, you're stupid. Judith looked down, biting her lip. She pulled her arm away from Timothy. Then I looked at my husband. My ex-husband. I used to think you were a victim of your parents, Tim, I said softly. I used to make excuses for you. But tonight, I saw the truth. You aren't a victim. You're a collaborator. You're a coward who hides behind women. First your mother, then me, now her. I love you, Celine, Timothy whispered, his voice cracking. No, you don't, I replied. You love the idea of being a father more than you fear your own father. That's not love. That's just another form of weakness. I turned back to Mason. Now get out of my way, or I will call the military police and have you arrested for unlawful detainment of a U.S. service member. And I promise you, that will make the front page of the Washington Post. Mason stared at me for a long, agonizing second. Then, slowly, defeatedly, he stepped aside. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like a sad, broken old man who had just lost his legacy. Let's go, Erica, I said. We pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the night. The humidity had broken, and the air was crisp and clean. We walked down the long brick steps toward Erica's black pickup truck parked in the circular driveway. Celine, wait! I heard the frantic footsteps behind me. I didn't stop. Celine, baby, please! Timothy came running down the stairs, stumbling in his dress shoes. He grabbed my arm just as I reached the passenger door. You can't leave like this, he sobbed, snot running down his nose, all his dignity gone. I can change. I'll cut them off. I'll move out. Just let me be a dad. Please, Celine, don't take him away. I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked into his eyes. I searched for any spark of the man I had married, but all I saw was a stranger. I'm not taking him away, Timothy, I said, my voice devoid of anger, devoid of sadness, just empty. I'm not taking him anywhere. I pulled my arm free from his grasp. You are the one who threw us away, I said. You treated us like trash. And now that you realize the trash was treasure, you don't get to reach back into the dumpster. Celine? In the military, when a soldier betrays their oath, acts with cowardice, and disgraces the uniform, we give them a dishonorable discharge, I said. It means you are stripped of all rank, all benefits, and all respect. You are exiled. I opened the car door. Consider this your dishonorable discharge, Timothy. You are dismissed. I climbed into the truck and slammed the door shut. Thud. The sound was final. It was the sound of a book closing. Timothy stood there, banging his palms against the glass, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I didn't roll down the window. I didn't look back at the mansion that had been my prison for 2 years. Drive, Erica, I said, staring straight ahead at the headlights cutting through the darkness. Drive, and don't look back. Erica put the truck in gear. The engine roared to life, drowning out Timothy's pleas. As we accelerated down the long driveway, leaving the Ashley estate in the rearview mirror, I felt the first real kick from inside my womb. A tiny flutter. It felt like a high five. We were free. 1 year later. The morning sun over Fort Liberty, North Carolina, hits differently than it does in Northern Virginia. In McLean, the sunrise always felt filtered through smog and pretension, struggling to shine on the manicured lawns. Here, the light is raw, unfiltered, and golden. It cuts through the pine trees and warms the wooden planks of my front porch. I sat on the swinging bench, a mug of hot coffee in my hand, watching the steam curl up into the crisp air. Attached to the pillar of the porch, the American flag snapped gently in the breeze. Snap. Snap. It was the sound of freedom. In my lap sat the reason for everything, David. He was 6 months old today. He had chubby legs that couldn't stop kicking, bright eyes that saw wonder in everything, and a laugh that sounded like pure, unadulterated joy. He reached out a tiny dimpled hand and grabbed my thumb, holding on with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Good morning, soldier," I whispered, kissing the top of his head. He smelled like baby powder and milk, the best smell in the world. We named him David, which means beloved. And his middle name is Erica. Because in our world, you honor the people who saved your life. I looked down at him and thought back to the day he arrived. It wasn't in a sterile, silent room with a husband checking his watch. It was chaotic, loud, and filled with love. When I went into labor, I wasn't alone. Erica was there, holding my left hand, coaching me through the contractions with the same intensity she used to call out commands in the field. And on my right, holding my other hand, was my biological mother. That was the other miracle that came from the wreckage of my divorce. When I walked away from the Ashleys, I realized I had been trying to force them to be the family I never had. I stopped looking for validation from strangers and started looking for my roots. I found her in a small town in Georgia. She wasn't rich. She didn't have pearls or a mansion. But she had a heart that had been waiting for me. When David took his first breath, he was welcomed by 3 generations of fighters. He was born into a fortress of loyalty, not a bank vault of conditions. Is he awake already? The screen door creaked open, and Erica stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "Pain is weakness leaving the body." She was holding 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast. "He refuses to miss reveille," I said, smiling. Erica sat down on the wicker chair next to the swing. She handed me a plate and looked at David. "He looks more like you every day. Thank God. If he looked like him, I'd have to teach him to do push-ups until he changed his face." I laughed. "We don't talk about him." "We don't," Erica agreed, taking a bite of toast. "But, purely for the sake of an intelligence update, did you see the news?" I shook my head. "I blocked the signal, remember?" "Well," Erica smirked, leaning back. "Word on the wire is that the Ashley dynasty is having a liquidity crisis. And a lineage crisis." She took a sip of my coffee. "Judith is gone. Turns out the perfect replacement wasn't so perfect. There are rumors of a phantom pregnancy, or maybe she just lied to seal the deal. Either way, no baby." And once Mason found out he'd thrown away the real heir for a hallucination, let's just say Sunday dinners aren't so polite anymore. I listened to the words, waiting to feel something. Anger, vindication, pity. I felt nothing. It was like hearing about a weather disaster in a country I'd never visited. It was tragic, sure, but it had nothing to do with me. Timothy was alone in that big, echoey house, surrounded by expensive furniture and parents who viewed him as a failed investment. He had traded reality for an illusion, and now he was left with empty hands. Karma, Erica said simply. It rarely misses. It's not just karma, Erica, I said, looking out at the street where other military families were starting their day. Kids were riding bikes. A dad was packing his gear for duty. It's a choice. They chose the legacy of the name. They wanted a statue to look at. They didn't want a family to love. I looked down at David. He was chewing on his fist, completely unbothered by the fact that he had been disinherited from a fortune. He didn't know he was supposed to be a broken product. He just knew he was loved. Mason Ashley had told me that a family requires a foundation. He was right about that, but he thought the foundation was money and bloodlines. He was wrong. The foundation is honor. It's loyalty. It's showing up when things get hard. General Patton once said, I murmured, stroking David's soft cheek, victory belongs to the most persevering. Damn straight, Erica said, and we persevered. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I felt a sense of wholeness that I had never felt in the 3 years I was married to Timothy. In the end, Mason and Sharon gave me the greatest gift of all. They thought the divorce papers were a death sentence for me. They thought they were evicting me into the wilderness, but they were wrong. Those papers were my emancipation proclamation. If I had stayed, I would have been a bird in a gilded cage, pecking at crumbs of affection, teaching my son that his value lay in his bank account. I would have withered away, that dry field Sharon talked about. But out here in the real world, with my chosen family, I was blooming. I looked at the sun rising higher, casting long shadows across the grass. I mentally wrote one last letter to Timothy, one that I would never send. Dear Timothy, you wanted an heir to carry your title. I am raising a son to carry his honor. You have your millions, your mansion, and your silence. I have the noise of laughter, the strength of sisterhood, and the future. Thank you for the cruel anniversary gift. Thank you for the divorce. It was the only way I could save my son. Signed, Celine. Hey, Erica said, nudging my foot with hers. Stop thinking so loud. The coffee is getting cold. I smiled, shaking off the ghosts of Virginia. I lifted my mug in a silent toast to the morning sun. You're right, I said. Let's eat. We have a big day ahead of us. I hugged David tighter, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against mine. The broken machine was running perfectly. And the legacy? It was just beginning. Looking back at that dining room in Virginia, I realized now that the divorce papers weren't a rejection. They were a redirection. Too often we cling to toxic relationships because we are afraid of the unknown, or because we confuse history with loyalty. But my journey taught me a priceless lesson. Blood makes you related, but only loyalty makes you family. Never let someone else's inability to see your value make you question your own worth. Being alone is far better than being with people who make you feel lonely. If you are holding on to a painful situation just because you are scared to let go, remember this. You are not a broken machine. You are simply in the wrong factory. Walking away isn't quitting. Sometimes it is the bravest act of self-love you will ever commit. Now, I want to turn this over to you, my listeners. Have you ever had to make the heartbreaking choice to cut ties with a family member or a partner to protect your own peace? It is a terrifying step to take, but often it is the only way to heal. Please share your story or just type, I choose me in the comments below to show that you are prioritizing your own well-being today. We read every single comment, and we are building a community of survivors here. If my story gave you hope or strength today, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story about justice, resilience, and finding the light after the darkness. Thank you for listening, and remember, your legacy is what you build, not what you inherit.